You can always tell how powerful a man thinks he is by how he treats someone who can't fight back. The laughter came easy at Ethan Caldwell's table, low and confident, the kind of laughter that filled expensive rooms and never asked permission to stay. Crystal glasses caught the golden light above, reflecting it across tailored suits and polished watches. Everything about the evening felt controlled, measured, owned. Ethan sat at the center of it all, fingers resting casually against the edge of a $300 bourbon. His expression calm but restless, like someone who had already won before the game even started. Across the room, Clara Whitmore moved between tables with quiet precision, her black uniform simple, her steps unhurried. She didn't rush like the others, didn't hover, didn't smile too much. She simply arrived, did what was needed, and left, efficient, almost invisible. And that was exactly why Ethan noticed her. "You see her," he said, nodding slightly in her direction without looking directly. One of his friends followed his gaze, smirk forming slowly. "What about her?" Ethan leaned back, eyes narrowing just enough to signal interest, not attraction, not curiosity, something colder, more analytical. "I bet I can break her," he said, voice low, almost bored. The table went still for half a second. Then someone chuckled. Another raised an eyebrow. "Break her? Make her lose that composure." Ethan clarified, tapping his glass lightly. 10 minutes, maybe less. The friend across from him laughed under his breath, shaking his head. "Careful, man, some people aren't meant to be played with." Ethan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Everyone has a limit," he replied simply. And just like that, the game began. Clara approached the table a moment later, not summoned, just on time. Her notepad ready, her expression neutral, not cold, not warm, just present. "Good evening," she said softly, her voice steady. "Can I start you with something to drink?" Ethan didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch, just slightly uncomfortable, just enough to test. Then he glanced up, finally meeting her eyes, expecting hesitation, expecting submission, expecting something, but what he found was stillness. Her gaze didn't drop, didn't challenge. It simply held, like she had nowhere else to be and nothing to prove. "You're new," he said. Even though he knew she wasn't, Clara didn't correct him. "No, sir," she replied calmly. "I've been here for a while." A faint smile touched someone's lips at the table. Ethan tilted his head, studying her more closely now, adjusting the angle, recalibrating. "Then I guess I just never noticed," he said, letting the implication hang. She wrote something down, though he hadn't ordered yet. "What would you like to drink?" she asked again. Same tone, same pace, unchanged. He ordered something unnecessarily specific, modifying it twice mid-sentence, watching for the flicker, the hesitation, the annoyance. "Anything." Clara nodded once. No reaction, no correction, just clarity. "I'll have that right out," she said, and turned to leave. "Wait," Ethan added. Just as she took her first step away, she paused, turned back, not rushed, not irritated, just present again. "Yes?" He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel personal, controlled. "Make sure it's perfect," he said, eyes fixed on hers, searching for the smallest crack. Clara held his gaze for a fraction longer than necessary, then gave a small nod. "Of course," she said, and walked away. And for the first time that night, Ethan didn't reach for his drink. He watched her instead. Something in the rhythm didn't match his expectations, not resistance, not compliance, something else, something quieter, something he couldn't quite name, and that made him lean in. The drink arrived exactly 4 minutes later, not 3, not 5. Placed gently on the table with a quiet precision that felt almost deliberate. Clara did not announce it, did not linger. She simply set it down and stepped back, giving space without asking for it. Ethan glanced at the glass, then at her, then back again, searching for something out of place, anything imperfect, but it was exactly as ordered, down to the smallest detail. "You forgot the lime," he said, even though he had never asked for one. The men at the table shifted slightly. One of them smirked, waiting. Clara's eyes moved to the glass, then back to him, calm, unshaken. "Would you like me to add one?" she asked, her tone unchanged. No apology, no defense, just a simple question. Ethan leaned back, studying her again, adjusting the game. "You should have known," he replied, letting the words hang heavier this time. Clara nodded once, as if accepting information rather than blame. I will bring one right away, she said, and turned, her pace the same as before, not faster, not slower, as if the moment had no weight at all. One of the men chuckled softly. That was not fair, he murmured, but Ethan did not respond. His attention stayed on Clara as she moved through the room, weaving between tables with that same quiet rhythm. Something about it felt controlled, not submissive, not reactive, controlled. She returned with a small plate, placing a perfectly sliced lime beside his glass. Again without a word, again without hesitation. Anything else? She asked, and for a second, just a second, Ethan felt the question shift. It did not feel like service, it felt like a boundary, like she was offering exactly what she chose to offer, nothing more, nothing less. Actually, yes, he said, leaning forward again, lowering his voice just enough to make the moment feel sharper. Sit down. The table went silent. One of his friends let out a quiet breath, another shook his head slightly. Clara did not move, did not react immediately. She simply looked at him, measuring something unseen, then shook her head once, polite, firm. I am working, she said, her voice soft but clear. Ethan smiled faintly, the kind of smile that usually opened doors. I can make it worth your time, he replied, tapping his watch lightly, the gesture subtle but obvious. Clara's gaze did not drop to it, did not acknowledge it at all. My time is already accounted for, she said, and there it was. Not defiance, not attitude, just a statement, simple and complete. One of the men at the table let out a low whistle under his breath. Another shifted in his seat, suddenly less amused. Ethan felt something unfamiliar press against the edges of his control. Not anger, not yet, something closer to resistance, like pushing against a surface that did not move. He picked up his glass, took a slow sip, eyes still on her, recalculating. You think you are better than this? He asked quietly, the question sharper now, designed to cut. Clara held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary, then shook her head gently. No, she said. I just know what I am not. The words landed differently than he expected. Not loud, not dramatic, but they stayed, lingering in the space between them. Ethan set his glass down slowly, the faint sound of crystal against wood louder than it should have been, around them. The restaurant continued as if nothing had changed, but at the table, something had shifted. The game was no longer simple, no longer predictable, and for the first time that night, Ethan realized he was not entirely sure of the rules anymore, and that unsettled him. Clara moved on as if nothing had happened, as if the tension at the table had dissolved the moment she stepped away, but Ethan felt it linger, like a thread pulled too tight. He watched her again, not casually this time, not as part of a game, but with focus, studying the way she handled each table, the way she adjusted her tone slightly for an older couple, softened her voice for a child, remained efficient with a group of impatient executives. She adapted without changing herself, and that detail did not sit right with him, because adaptation usually meant compromise, and he had not seen her compromise once. You are overthinking this, one of his friends muttered, breaking the silence. Ethan did not look away from Clara. No, he said quietly. I am correcting my approach. He set his glass down and leaned forward again. The game was not over. It had simply changed shape. When Clara returned to check on the table, he did not speak immediately. He let the silence build again. But this time, it felt different, heavier, less controlled. How long have you been working here? He asked finally, his tone smoother now, less sharp. Clara paused for half a second, then answered. Long enough, she said, not evasive, just complete. Ethan smiled slightly. That is not an answer, he replied. Clara tilted her head just slightly, as if considering whether the question deserved more. It is the one I chose to give, she said. And again, there it was, that quiet boundary, not aggressive, not defensive, simply present. One of the men at the table shifted in his seat, no longer amused. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose, adjusting again. You must have plans beyond this, he continued, gesturing lightly around the room. The implication clear. Clara followed the gesture with her eyes, then returned her gaze to him. Everyone has plans, she said. Not everyone needs to explain them. Ethan's fingers tapped lightly against the table, a small, controlled movement. But it carried a different energy now, less playful, more intentional. "So you are just going to stay here?" he pressed. Clara did not answer right away. She looked at him, not through him, not past him, directly at him, and for a brief moment, something shifted in her expression, not emotion, not vulnerability, something closer to recognition, like she had seen this question before, heard it from someone else, in another room, under different lighting. "I am exactly where I need to be," she said softly, and the simplicity of it landed harder than anything else she had said so far. Ethan leaned back slightly, his mind moving faster now, recalculating, searching for the angle that would break through, because there was always an angle. There was always a way in. He had built an empire on that belief, you know, he said, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. "People like you always think dignity is something you can hold on to forever." Clara did not react, did not interrupt. She simply listened. "But everyone has a price," he finished, the words softer than before, but heavier, more deliberate. The table went quiet again, the kind of silence that did not invite laughter. Clara stood there for a moment, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. And then, slowly, she shook her head, not dismissive, not dramatic, just certain. "No," she said, "everyone has a choice." The difference between the two words hung in the air, price and choice. One transactional, one personal. Ethan felt it, even if he did not show it. His jaw tightened slightly, his fingers still against the table. For the first time that night, he did not have an immediate response, did not have a move ready, and Clara did not wait for one. "Is there anything else you need?" she asked, the same question as before, but now it carried something different, not service, not submission, something closer to finality. Ethan looked at her, really looked this time, and for a brief, unguarded second, he saw it. Not weakness, not resistance, something far more unsettling, certainty, and he realized, quietly, almost reluctantly, that breaking her was no longer the challenge. Understanding her was, and that was a game he had never learned how to win. The air at the table had changed, not louder, not more tense, but heavier, like something invisible had taken a seat among them. Ethan felt it in the way no one reached for their drinks as quickly, in the way conversations at nearby tables seemed louder by comparison, normal, unaffected, while his world, just a few feet wide, had narrowed into something precise and unfamiliar. Clara stepped away again, leaving behind that quiet question, and this time Ethan did not call her back. He let her go. But his eyes followed, tracing the same patterns again. Except now he was not looking for weakness. He was looking for proof. Proof that she was like everyone else, that she had a limit, that she could be measured, understood, reduced, because that was how he had always navigated the world. Everything had a structure, a leverage point, a moment where pressure turned into compliance. He had built companies on that principle, negotiated deals that way, shaped outcomes that others thought were impossible. But here, in a room filled with polished glass and controlled lighting, one woman in a simple uniform was refusing to fit into that system, and that irritated him more than he expected. "You are still on this?" one of his friends asked quietly, watching him. Ethan did not look away. "I do not like unfinished things," he replied, his voice calm. But there was something underneath it now, something sharper, more personal. When Clara returned again, this time to clear a plate that had barely been touched, Ethan moved before she could step away, sliding a folded bill across the table. Not a tip, not yet, just money, placed deliberately, visible, intentional. "Take it," he said, his tone even, but firm. Clara's eyes dropped briefly to the bill, then lifted back to his face, her expression unchanged. "For what?" she asked, and the simplicity of the question caught him off guard for half a second. "For your time," he said, as if that should be enough, as if it always was. Clara held his gaze, not challenging, not yielding, just holding. "My time is not for sale like that," she said quietly, and slid the bill back toward him. The motion smooth, unhurried, final. One of the men at the table shifted uncomfortably. Another let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. Ethan stared at the money for a moment, then back at her, recalculating again. But this time the equation did not balance. "Everything is for sale," he said, softer now. not as a challenge, more like a belief he had never questioned until this moment. Clara shook her head slightly, almost gently. No, she replied. Some things are just chosen. And there it was again, that word, choice. It lingered in the air like something that could not be negotiated, could not be bought, could only be respected or ignored. Ethan leaned back slowly, his fingers brushing the edge of the bill, but he did not pick it up, not yet. He looked at her differently now, not as a problem to solve, not as a game to win, but as something he did not fully understand, and that unsettled him more than losing ever could. Then why are you here? He asked, the question quieter now, stripped of its earlier edge, almost honest. Clara paused, just for a moment, and in that pause there was something new, not hesitation, not weakness, something closer to weight, like the answer mattered, like it carried more than just words. Because I decided to be, she said, and the room seemed to shrink around that sentence, not because it was loud, but because it was complete. Ethan felt something shift again, deeper this time, not in the game, but in himself, a small crack in the certainty he had always carried. And for the first time that night, he did not try to fill the silence that followed. He simply sat there, looking at her, realizing slowly, quietly, that control was not slipping away. It had never been his to begin with, and that realization did not feel like defeat. It felt like something far more expensive. The bill stayed on the table, untouched, a quiet symbol of something that had failed without anyone raising their voice. Ethan did not push it again, did not insist, and that alone shifted the energy more than any argument could have. He leaned back in his chair, his fingers now still, no longer tapping, no longer signaling control, just resting, as if even that small motion had lost its purpose around him. The conversation at the table tried to restart, soft jokes, half-hearted remarks, but none of it landed the same way. Something had already moved past them, something none of them could quite name. Clara continued her work, the same steady rhythm, the same measured steps, but now Ethan saw it differently, not as routine, not as repetition, but as intention, every movement chosen, every pause deliberate, nothing wasted, nothing performed, and for the first time that night, he realized she was not reacting to him at all. She was simply being herself, and that realization unsettled him in a way he could not immediately explain. When she returned again, not to his table specifically, but passing by, Ethan spoke without planning to. Clara, he said, her name unfamiliar on his tongue. She stopped, turned slightly, not surprised, not curious, just attentive. Yes? She asked, the same calm tone, unchanged. Ethan hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, then continued. Do you ever get tired of this? He gestured lightly around them. The room, the noise, the expectations. Everything. Clara followed the gesture briefly, then looked back at him. Of what? She asked, not dismissive, just precise. Ethan exhaled quietly, searching for the right word, but none of them felt accurate. Of people, he said finally, the words softer than he intended. Clara considered that for a moment, her expression unreadable, then shook her head slightly. No, she said. I get tired of how some people choose to be. The distinction was subtle, but it landed. Ethan looked down at the table, at the glass, at the bill still sitting there, and for the first time, he felt something close to discomfort, not because of her, but because of himself, because her words did not accuse, they did not attack, they simply reflected, and what they reflected was not flattering. And you? She asked quietly. The question unexpected. Ethan looked up, caught off guard. Do you ever get tired? She clarified, and there was no judgment in her voice, no edge, just a simple question, the kind that did not demand an answer, but still waited for one. Ethan opened his mouth slightly, then paused, because the answer that came to mind was not one he was used to saying out loud. No, he started, automatically, then stopped, his jaw tightening just slightly. Yes, he corrected, the word quieter, more honest, and for a moment, the two of them simply stood there, not as customer and waitress, not as power and service, just two people sharing a truth that did not need to be explained further. Clara nodded once, not approving, not acknowledging, just accepting. Then maybe it is not the place, she said softly. Maybe it is the way you are choosing to carry it. Ethan felt that sentence settle somewhere deeper than the others, not sharp, not immediate, but lasting, like something that would return later, when the room was quiet and there was nothing left to distract him. He looked at her again, really looked, and this time, he did not see someone to challenge, or to measure, or to break. He saw someone who had already made choices he had never considered, and lived with them without needing validation, without needing to prove anything to anyone. And that was something he could not buy, could not negotiate, could not control. Clara gave a small, polite nod, the same as she had given at the beginning of the night. But now it meant something different. Now it felt like closure, like a line being drawn without force, without resistance, just there. And as she turned and walked away once more, Ethan did not stop her, did not call her back. He simply watched. The room returning to its normal rhythm around him. But something inside him no longer followed that rhythm. Something had shifted, quietly, completely, and he knew, without needing to say it out loud, that whatever he had come here to win, he had already lost something far more important instead. The restaurant began to thin out as the night moved forward, the sharp edge of dinner hours softening into something quieter, more reflective. Glasses were cleared, chairs shifted, conversations lowered into murmurs that no longer needed to impress anyone. But at Ethan's table, time felt different, slower, heavier, like it had detached from the rest of the room and settled only around him. He had not touched the bill, not the drink, not even his phone, which sat face down beside his hand as if it no longer held the same importance it once did. His friends noticed, of course they did. One of them leaned in slightly, voice low. "You are really letting this go?" Ethan did not answer right away, his eyes still tracking Clara as she spoke with another table, her expression softening slightly, a small, genuine smile appearing for just a moment before returning to that calm neutrality he now recognized as something intentional, not empty. "It was never about winning," he said finally, the words surprising even himself. The man across from him raised an eyebrow. "That is not what you said earlier." Ethan nodded faintly, acknowledging the truth without defending it. "I was wrong," he said simply, and that sentence carried more weight than anything he had said all evening, because it did not come with explanation or justification, just acceptance. Across the room, Clara moved again, unaware or perhaps simply uninterested in the shift that had taken place behind her. She was finishing her section, clearing the last table, adjusting a chair slightly before stepping back, always leaving things exactly as they should be. Ethan watched that small detail, the way she corrected something no one else would have noticed, not for recognition, not for reward, just because it mattered to her. And something about that settled deeper than any conversation they had shared. He stood up slowly, the movement drawing quiet attention from his table. But he did not acknowledge it. He picked up the bill, folded it once, then placed it neatly under the edge of the glass, not pushed forward, not presented, just left there, without expectation, without statement. When Clara returned a few minutes later, she paused when she saw him standing, her eyes flickering briefly to the table, taking in the untouched bill, the repositioned glass, the subtle difference, then back to him. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her tone the same as it had been all night, steady, composed. But now there was a slight shift, something softer, not familiarity, but recognition. Ethan nodded once. "Yes," he said, and for a moment, he hesitated again, not because he did not know what to say, but because he was not used to saying it this way, without control, without advantage. "Thank you," he added, the words quiet, but clear. Clara held his gaze for a moment, then gave a small nod, accepting it without reaction, without surprise, just as something that had been offered and received. "You are welcome," she replied, and that was all. No extended exchange, no softened ending, just closure, clean and complete. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his card, and placed it on the table. But this time, the gesture felt different, not transactional, not strategic, just necessary. Clara picked it up, processing it quickly, efficiently, returning it with the same calm precision, no lingering, no added words. When she stepped away again, Ethan did not watch her this time, not because he was no longer interested, but because he understood something now, something simple, something final, that she had never been part of his game, not from the beginning, not even for a second. She had been living by a different set of rules entirely, and he had only just realized it. As he turned to leave, his friends watching him with quiet curiosity, Ethan paused for a brief moment, looking back at the table, at the empty glass, at the folded bill, and then toward the space where Clara had been standing, now already moving on, already focused on something else. And in that moment, he understood the cost of the lesson he had been given, not measured in dollars, not written on a receipt, but carried somewhere deeper, somewhere he could not ignore, because for the first time in a long time, he had met someone who could not be moved, and instead of breaking her, he had been the one forced to change, quietly, completely, and without negotiation. The night air outside was cooler than Ethan expected, sharp against his skin as he stepped out onto the quiet sidewalk. The city still alive but distant now. Its noise softened into a low hum that no longer demanded his attention. He paused just outside the entrance, one hand in his pocket, the other adjusting his jacket out of habit, but even that small motion felt unnecessary, like a reflex from a version of himself that had not yet caught up. Behind him, through the glass, the restaurant continued without interruption, tables reset, lights steady, Clara moving through it all with the same calm rhythm, unchanged, unaffected, as if nothing significant had happened at all. And that realization stayed with him longer than anything else, because for him, something had shifted, something fundamental, and yet for her, it had simply been another evening, another table, another interaction that required nothing more than presence and choice. One of his friends stepped out a moment later, loosening his tie slightly, glancing at Ethan with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "You really walked away from that?" he asked. Ethan did not respond immediately, his eyes still on the reflection in the glass, watching a version of himself standing there, composed, controlled, but somehow quieter. "I did not walk away," he said finally, his voice lower than usual, more grounded. "I stayed long enough to understand." The man frowned slightly, clearly not following, but did not press further. After a moment, he nodded and headed toward the waiting car, leaving Ethan alone again. The street stretching out in front of him, familiar, predictable, structured, just like everything else in his world had always been. But tonight, it felt different, not because the city had changed, but because his way of seeing it had. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, the screen lighting up instantly, notifications, messages, reminders, all waiting for his attention, all demanding it. But he did not open any of them. Not yet. Instead, he turned slightly, looking back through the window one more time. Clara was at the counter now, speaking quietly with another employee, her expression soft, relaxed, something closer to ease than he had seen all night. And for a brief moment, he wondered what she was like outside of that space, not as a waitress, not within the boundaries of service, but as herself, fully, completely, and the thought lingered, not as curiosity to act on, but as something to respect, something not meant to be pursued or defined by him. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, exhaling slowly, and started walking, no destination in mind, just movement, the kind that did not need to be efficient or productive, just intentional, each step steady, unhurried, the sound of his shoes against the pavement grounding him in a way he had not felt in years. And as he walked, the words returned, not loudly, not insistently, just present. "Everyone has a choice. Not everything is for sale. You are not trying to break me. You are trying to prove you can." They did not accuse him. They did not follow him like guilt. They simply stayed, like truths he had finally heard clearly. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan did not try to silence them, did not try to reframe them into something more comfortable. He let them be. He let them sit, because somewhere along the way, without realizing it, he had spent years building a life where everything responded to him. Everything moved when he applied pressure. Everything shifted when he decided it should. And tonight, one person had not moved, not resisted, not fought, simply remained. And in doing so, she had shown him something he had never needed to learn before, that real strength does not push back. It stands still and lets everything else reveal itself around it. Ethan slowed his pace slightly, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his expression, not from satisfaction, not from victory, but from something quieter, something closer to understanding. And as the city stretched out ahead of him, unchanged and familiar, He realized that the most expensive lessons were never the ones you paid for. They were the ones that stayed with you long after you left the table, long after the night ended, long after there was nothing left to prove. The city did not slow down for anyone, not for reflection, not for realization. It moved the same way it always had, steady and indifferent, but Ethan did not move with it the same way anymore. His pace remained measured, not rushed, not driven by the next meeting or the next objective, just present, the kind of presence he had not allowed himself in years. He passed storefronts glowing with late-night light, heard distant laughter spill from a bar across the street, watched a couple pause under a street lamp as if time had given them permission to stand still for a moment. And for the first time, he did not filter it all through value or utility. He simply noticed, and that alone felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, persistent now, reminders stacking, decisions waiting, people expecting responses, the world he had built calling him back into its rhythm. But he did not reach for it. Not yet. Instead, he stopped at the corner, the traffic light casting a soft red glow across the pavement, and for a brief moment, he stood there, not thinking about where he needed to go next, just standing. The words returned again, quieter this time, not as statements, but as something deeper, something that had already begun to settle into place. Everyone has a choice. He repeated it silently, testing it, not as a challenge, but as a truth, and it shifted something inside him. Because for years, he had believed that power came from shaping outcomes, from controlling variables, from making sure nothing was left to chance. But tonight had shown him something else, something he had overlooked, that there was a different kind of power in choosing who you were, regardless of what the situation demanded, regardless of who stood in front of you. He exhaled slowly, the cool air steadying him, and when the light changed, he crossed the street without urgency, each step grounded, intentional, not leading somewhere specific, but still moving forward, back inside the restaurant. Clara finished her shift the same way she had handled the entire evening, without ceremony, without reflection. She tied her apron loose, folded it neatly, placed it where it belonged, and stepped out from behind the role she had carried for hours, not shedding it, not escaping it, just setting it down. Another part of her day complete, one of her coworkers said something light, a small joke about a long night. Clara smiled briefly, the kind of smile that did not linger, then reached for her bag, slipping it over her shoulder with practiced ease. As she moved toward the exit, she passed the table where Ethan had been sitting earlier, now empty, reset, indistinguishable from any other, the bill gone, the glass replaced, no trace of what had taken place. And yet, for a brief moment, she paused, not out of sentiment, not out of attachment, just awareness. She looked at the space, then moved on, stepping outside into the same cool air, the same quiet city, her pace matching the rhythm of someone who had nothing to prove and nowhere to rush. And somewhere a few blocks away, Ethan continued walking, carrying something unseen, something unspoken, not a loss, not a victory, but a shift, subtle and complete. And though their paths moved in different directions, though their lives would likely never intersect again, the moment they had shared remained, not as a memory to revisit, but as a line that had been drawn, quietly, permanently, between who he had been and who he was becoming. And for once, that difference could not be measured, could not be calculated, it could only be lived. Morning arrived without ceremony, the kind of quiet transition that did not announce itself but still changed everything. The city woke in layers, light stretching across glass buildings, traffic beginning its steady rhythm, people moving with purpose toward places that expected them, and Ethan stood at the edge of it all, looking out from his office window 30 floors above the street. The view was the same as it had been every day before. Sharp, structured, predictable, but something about it felt different now, not because the world had changed, but because he had stopped trying to shape it for a moment. His phone rested on the desk behind him, silent for once, not because there were no messages, but because he had not reached for it. Not yet. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, composed, controlled, the same man everyone else saw. But he knew now there was something beneath that surface, something quieter, something that no longer needed to prove itself through pressure or control. The words returned again, softer than before, not as thoughts, but as something settled. Everyone has a choice, He let them sit there, not analyzing them, not turning them into strategy, just letting them exist, because for the first time, he understood that not everything needed to be used. Some things simply needed to be understood. Across the city, Clara walked her usual route. The same streets, the same small details most people overlooked, a coffee shop. Opening its doors, the smell of fresh bread drifting into the air, the sound of someone laughing too loudly at something simple, her pace steady, unhurried. The same rhythm she carried through everything she did, not because she had nowhere to be, but because she chose not to rush through what mattered. She passed by the restaurant without stopping, just a glance, a quiet acknowledgement of a place that had already moved into yesterday. And then she kept going, her day unfolding in its own way. Separate, complete, not waiting for anything to return to it. Back in his office, Ethan turned from the window, finally reaching for his phone, the screen lighting up instantly. Reminders, meetings, decisions, all still there, unchanged, waiting for him to step back into the role he had built. And he did, but not the same way, not with the same urgency. He scrolled through the messages, responding where needed, but slower, more deliberate, not reacting, choosing, and that small difference shifted everything. Later that afternoon, in a meeting room filled with sharp voices and sharper expectations, someone made a comment, dismissive, quick, the kind of remark he might have ignored before, or even reinforced. But this time, he paused, just for a second, long enough to see it clearly. And then he spoke, not louder, not aggressively, just enough to redirect, to set a different tone. The room adjusted, subtly, but noticeably. And for the first time, Ethan realized that influence did not have to come from pressure. It could come from presence, from the way you chose to respond instead of react. And somewhere in that realization, the lesson settled fully, not as a memory of a night, not as a story to revisit, but as something integrated, something that would show up in the way he moved, the way he spoke, the way he chose. And though Clara was no longer there, though her voice had long since faded into the background of the city, what she had given him remained, not as something he owed, not as something he needed to repay, but as something he carried forward, quietly, completely.